Welcome back. Now with the loom back in, I can start working through the main systems on the bike. But before I start working on the cooling and the fuel systems, I'm going to make sure I've got everything on the engine wrapped up, starting with new oil and a fresh filter. I span on the new filter and tightened it up. Because it mounts to the front, I couldn't fill it with oil beforehand like you could if it was underneath. So I'll just have to bear in mind that the filter will be empty when I fill it up. The drain plug with a new washer went in next, with a couple of safety taps for good luck. I brought the bike back down level and opened the filler cap. The capacity when completely dry is 3.6 litres, so I measured out 1 litre first, poured that in and repeated that 2 more times. This brought the oil level in the sump to around the normal level in the sight glass. When I was adding the extra 600ml though, I heard something a little bit concerning. I'll need to sort the water pump. I dug it out, took it apart and ordered replacement seals, and while I wait for those to arrive, I pulled out the small frame brackets. These were in good condition, but they definitely benefited from a quick sandblast and a repaint to bring them up nicely. Fitting these to the frame now helps because the loom clips to them, plus the front two are the top radiator mounting bolts, so they need to be sorted before I do the cooling system. The postman brought some new seals and I'd given the housing a clean up and repaint, so reassembly was nice and straightforward. Well, compared to how it was, I think this is a vast improvement. Now I can plug that gaping hole. Being careful to align the slot in the shaft with the drive from the oil pump, I pressed the water pump in. The inlet spigot cleaned up nicely once all that crusty white oxidation was removed, so I grabbed a new O-ring and fit it to the water pump. I added the remaining oil and now I can move on to something that I honestly haven't really been looking forward to. The clutch slave cylinder was very yucky indeed, so I pulled it apart ready for a rebuild. I'll do the same with the master cylinder. I also picked up a braided hose from Hell to complete the kit. The master cylinder was in a much better condition, so I'll just strip, clean and rebuild this. The lever was a bit crunchy, so I stripped it down and gave it 15 minutes in the ultrasonic cleaner to degrease. I removed the circlet that holds the piston in and removed it along with the spring and washer. I collected up all the old bits and prepared the new parts. The piston bore was in good condition, so I cleaned it with brake cleaner and a soft brush. I put a bit of rubber grease on the seals and inserted them into the bore. Then I added the washer and finally the circlip. Using the push rod to compress the spring, I popped the circlip back into its groove. Then I added the rubber boot to the push rod and with a blunt drift pressed the boot into the bore. A quick test and all felt good. Moving on to the reservoir side, I fitted the O-ring, then the spigot, checking a photograph for reference for the angle it needed to face. I dropped the circlip over and pressed it into its groove. Then pressed in the rubber boot. The ultrasonic tank was done, so I went to grab the Well, it was a cheap aftermarket lever, so I'll fork out and get a proper one to replace it. But I'll use this in the meantime to bleed the system. I'd cleaned up the clutch switch, so I fitted it back to the master cylinder with a nice new screw. After a thorough clean, I rebuilt the reservoir and mounted it to its bracket. I replaced the hose clips as they'd started to corrode. I really need to get the correct type of pliers for these things terrify me. With everything back together, that's the master cylinder done, so moving on to the slave. I stripped what was left of the paint and gave it and the bracket a fresh coat of paint. Rebuilding this end is a lot more straightforward. So I fit the bleed nipple with its new cap, then removed the old seal from the piston, gave it a clean out, then greased and fitted the new seal. Then fitted the new spring and pressed it into the bore. A quick test and it all felt good. As the bracket acts as a guard for the front sprocket, I fitted the new one to check all fits properly. I'll take this all off again when I fit the chain to torque up the nut. With the bracket on, I fed the clutch line up through the gap in the frame, checking the routing in the manual. With that routed correctly, I fit the slave cylinder into the bracket, engaging the piston with the clutch push rod. I fed the master cylinder up the left handlebar and clamped it roughly in the right position. With the reservoir bracket bolted back onto the top yoke, I tweaked the position of the clamp and fit the hydraulic line to the master cylinder. I checked I had free movement of the bars and then nipped up the banjo bolt. I've ordered a new lever, but for now I'll fit the old one just to bleed the system. I checked that the bottom banjo bolt was tight, then opened the reservoir cap. I always prefer to bleed a dry system from the bottom up, so I fill a syringe with fluid, fit the hose onto the bleed nipple at the slave cylinder, and cracked it open. Applying gentle pressure, I squeezed fluid into the system, keeping an eye on the reservoir until I could see fluid coming out. Once it was nearly full, I tried the lever and I already had quite a bit of pressure. A natural trapping point for air is the banjo bolt or the master cylinder, so I applied gentle pressure to the lever and cracked the bolt slightly to let the air escape, catching any drips of a rag. I lowered the bike down level and then pumped the lever multiple times, tapping the line to allow any last air to escape. Doesn't take too long and it was all out. I gave the area a good spray of brake cleaner and a wipe down to remove any traces of brake fluid, and then sucked out the excess fluid from the reservoir. I refitted the cap and screwed down the retaining clip. Then I held the lever in with a cable tie to pressurise the system. I'll leave it like this overnight and I'll check all the joints for any signs of leaks in the morning. While I waited, I repainted the bottom radiator bracket and fitted that. The next day, with no leaks and a new clutch lever, I removed the old one that I ruined, greased up the mechanisms and fit the new lever. There we go, clutch is now 100% done. The postman also brought me a new chain, so I prepped that and whipped off the slave cylinder for full access to the front sprocket. I fed the new chain round the front sprocket and brought the two ends together on the rear. I greased the seals and put two on the master link, then pushed it through the chain from behind. The other two seals went on, and then I put the outer plate on. I dug out my chain riveting tool and used the plates to press the link together, checking the target width by measuring a nearby link and comparing it. With that on, I swapped to the riveting pin and mushroomed the ends of the studs. I checked it all moved freely, and that's the new chain on. I span out the chain adjuster to set the tension, and I did the same on the other side, making sure it was all aligned properly. I brought the bike down to torque up the axle nut, and then with a chock under the rear wheel, I could torque up the front sprocket nut as well, then bend over the tab washer. With the slave cylinder back on, I could take a look back at what this area looked like before and how it's looking now. Much better. Right, I'm making good progress, so I'm going to try and keep this up. I've already got the cooling system laid out here, and I'm going to get sorted on the exhaust pipe because that's all kind of linked with how it all goes back together. So I'll be back very soon, hopefully in a week, with all that. I'll see you then.